Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about SurrealEstate Season 2, Episode 9. Great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So we're picking up in the aftermath of last episode. Luckily, the squad, I guess, got to Zoe in time because they ended up taking her to the hospital, or she got herself back to the agency, and then they took her to the hospital. But whatever the case may be, Luke was just with her, and then all of a sudden he's with this girl who you see her walk away, and then she just magically pops up, and Luke doesn't realize what it is until he's walking away, until he talks to her, because she almost got hit by like a truck or something, which I don't know if that correlates with what happened later on in the episode. Because didn't she say but she said she got hit by like a white truck or a white van or something like that. I was just wondering if there was some correlation, but I don't think so. When Naz almost got Nasir almost got hit by it, but it was like a gray like pickup truck or something. It's not a no. Like I said, I'm pretty sure the girl said she was hit by a white van, but she's staying there hoping that her mom will come back. But because they just had a big argument, and it's very poetic considering not only does Luke get his powers back because of his mom, that was after some time of him and his mom healing, where he ends up the first spirit he interacts with is someone who had issues with her mom. So it was very poetic, and that was the kind of, I guess, the cosmos way of kind of showing you oh yeah, you got your mojo back. But it's parents you might get into an argument, but she might not always be there. But at the end of the day, she loves you, and your mom wouldn't want you to be here. So what would she want you to do? And so she couldn't let go, and she just kept waiting for her mom, and no one responded until she first talked to Luke. And now he convinced her, and she walks across the street and is able to move on. So it's sad too, because for all we know, her mom, who knows how long she's been there, who knows what happened to her mom. You couldn't get full closure in that regard, but I would have hoped that maybe Luke would be able to track down her mom, but who knows? Maybe that's just indicating I don't know. The fact that she was able to move on I wonder on some level, is her mom going too? Did her mom get hit by the vehicle too, and did her mom already move on but she didn't? That stuff like that, we'll never really have an answer to that. But now that Luke's got his mojo back, we're going to divide the episode up in two parts. First part, we're going to deal with that house that Lomax is trying to sell, which is this woman, Jyoti, and her new husband, Nasir, are trying to move out because this house was made by her now deceased first husband. Was it? Because I forgot how you properly pronounce it. It almost looks like Zane spelled out, but you say it like Zayn or something like that. I forgot how you actually pronounce it. But I saw the actor. I was like, wait, is that who I think it is? I had to look up the character name from Winona Earp because I completely forgot. I was like, I felt so bad. I felt so stupid. How could I forget Jeremy's name? Oh, I was like, dude, that's amazing. Also, this episode was directed by Melanie Scarfano, so I was like, oh, it's beautiful and perfect. That's why I was almost kind of bummed for a second. I was like, are you telling me Luke and Zion won't have any Tim and Jeremy's actor won't have any scenes together at all? But they do. I was like, okay, good. It's there's no way you could go this episode and not have them on screen together. I was like, that'd be kind of a travesty. If I'm not mistaken, because I know Melanie obviously was in an episode of last season, but didn't she also direct the episode she was in? Or was it a different episode that she directed? I could have sworn it was the episode she was in that she directed, but maybe it was a different episode. But either way, I was just it just feels poetic. And also, like I said, the character's name, Zion, in his room, there's a poster for Winona Earp. It's not even Winona Earp, the comic. It's specifically Winona Earp, the TV show. I was like, shut up. That's amazing. Because he has a whole bunch of comic books spread around. I'm not the comic book person, so I didn't recognize anything. It'd be interesting if there were, probably some. There could have been. I don't know if you could. Maybe, I don't know what the licensing rights for a comic book would be if you were to get the Winona Earp comics. Maybe considering this is on the same channel, you're able to kind of get away with licensing rights for a TV show. Because they also keep it super out of focus, because it's right, the last thing you need is, isn't it interesting how Doc looks strangely like Luke, but I guess you could also get away with it. His hair is a little bit, because obviously it's back when Tim had longer hair and he had, he had the bushy mustaches, Doc. So it's like you're able to kind of skirt around that. Like, oh, you look eerily the same. At least they didn't try to make no meta joke, but it's still appreciated. And it's just like, oh god, just seeing that made me go like, man, I love Winona Earp. I've been meaning to make a video talking about Winona Earp, because I never made one at the time saying goodbye to the show, and I've been thinking about that. We'll see if I end up doing one in the future. I by talking about in this review, hopefully I end up pushing myself to actually do it. But either way, it felt nice. It just felt like, I love that. But yeah, Zion is haunting his ex-wife, and he doesn't want her to move on, So he's trying to screw things up. Like, she's packing up. Well, they were trying to pack up all his stuff and give it away to the Salvation Army. But then he unpacks it, and now Naz and Joe are having issues. And he's delighted about it because he's like, cool, that guy's not right for you. Who's right for you? Me. Like, we can just live our lives, which is, it's like ironic considering you're dead. His ultimate solution, I was like, I'm surprised you didn't come to that sooner. I was afraid that that'd be the decision you were going to make sooner than you were. Because he was so busy trying to get rid of Nasir, I was worried like, oh, you try and kill Joe. That ends up being his solution later on, or like his perceived solution. But luckily, Lomax has been around enough of the weird stuff to be like, okay, so yeah, and with everything going on, she's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure the dead husband's haunting the place. So now that he's got his mojo back, Luke steps in. Like I said, I'm glad they were able to have scenes together. If you don't know, if you've never seen Winona Earp, I'm curious how many people are coming across this show who've never seen Winona Earp. I'd assume a lot of people came. Well, it makes you wonder how many people are watching this show who are fans of Schitt's Creek because of Tim and Sarah, who play Susan, and how many people are coming. I came into the show because I was like, hey, Tim Rosen, because this is post not only Winona Earp but also Vagabond Princess. Was it Vagabond Princess or was it Vanguard Princess? No, it was Vagrant Princess, right? The short-lived show that he was on prior to this. I can't remember if that was post the final season of Winona Earp. Was that like coinciding? I think that was post final episodes of Winona Earp. Either way, tangent on that side. So that was kind of my end to the show. I mean, I just like the concept in here, but I was like, oh, hey, Tim Rosen, that's dope. So it makes you wonder how many people had that. Like, I mean, I'm sure there might be some crossover in that regard too. So. But yeah, like Jeremy as a character had a major thing for Doc, so it felt also extra poetic for them to have some scenes together in this episode. So Lomax had actually suggested she's the one who suggested the therapy session, and I was thinking maybe that was going to go down a lot better, but it ended up kind of blowing up in everyone's face. But because Lomax had talked about a married couple and the husband had died from like cancer and they weren't in a great place, but they ended up going to couples counseling and they were able to go back to the way they were. It's like, right, when holding her husband's hand until the day he died was almost like holding hands for the first date again. So it's like, well, who do we have a therapy session for? Like the old husband or the new husband? And Lomax is like, oh, everybody really. And so obviously, Luke is trying his best, but Nasir's the one that's the most resistant to it. And it is so much more explained later on when he kind of puts it in perspective of, well, yeah, I've always lived in this guy's shadow. I will always be, hey, this was like her first major love. Like, this is the person who built this house. He was kind of her light. She was in such a dark place after losing him. And that's what for her was what she was trying to get across too, was she never thought she could be happy again until she met Nasir, because the only time she would leave the house was to go pray. That was the only time she ever left, and that's how she met Nasir. And he made her happy, and she never thought she'd be happy again. And even later on, she's talking to Luke, like, how could you paint Zion like that, like he was some possessive person and stuff like that? But it's like, no, he loved me, and if he he would love me so much that he would want me to be happy. And you could tell like that affected Zion, because he, here I am, I think it's a little bit of that, it's like you don't want to be forgotten. This is the person that you love, and for them to move on, you feel like you're being betrayed. And also, it's just I think the malice kind of consumes you a little bit more the longer you've been dead, because he's been dead for like over a year, I think. But the problem was he only now found out he was dead because he got brought back here because they were selling the house and get rid of his stuff, and that's what drew his spirit back here now. And ultimately, he's like, right, getting rid of Nasir is not going to do the trick. Because, well, if I accidentally kill him, I'm going to be stuck here, being his spotter as he's been pressuring. Like, no, I don't want that. So, easiest thing to do is just kill Joe. And Luke's like, all right, so how you going to do it? You're going to bash her head in? You're going to stab her deep with a knife? You're going to take some rat poison? And he was like, stop. It's like, no, you stop. The thing is, if you really love someone, which you claim you do, you love them enough to let them go. And then hearing that on top of what like Joe said about how she she had talked about being happy for the first time, and she's like, don't I deserve happiness? And Zion hearing that kind of made him realize, like, man, I am kind of a dick for what I'm doing. And he hears how like Nasir feels inferior, like, yeah, man, he's so much better than me. He was a cook, he was this pop cultural like guy who knew all this stuff. How do you compare living in someone else's shadow? And he ended up ultimately saving Nasir's life from a driver who wasn't paying attention. And it is that sweet moment at the end where he's talking to Joe, and it's like, I thought I loved you so much that I couldn't let you go. It's like, I now know I love you, and I love you so much that I can let you go. And I thought that was beautiful, kissing her and walking away. Never the easiest thing walking away, especially in that instance. I even love that Lomax was like, yeah, I guess Zion had passed on the information to Luke about how much those comics are worth. It's like, pristine comics do, and especially if they're rare enough, and in pristine enough condition, can go for a pretty penny in this market and stuff. So it's like, yeah, 6 figures, be a down payment on the house. It's like kind of like a final gift from her husband from beyond the grave. So I thought that was kind of a beautiful element to that episode. I always like those sides of the episodes, because there's always like this like nice, beautiful result in some cases. Other cases, it's still just sad all around. I mean, it's sad. Like, right, he has like a heart thing that ended up killing him at a very young age. It does suck, But it works out all around. Speaking of, really quickly, the Lomax's circumstances, we're still continuing the lady that she's with that's immortal. I'm wondering, is that going to get not cleaned up, but dealt with by the end of the season, or will that be an element that potentially like continues on? But Lomax is talking to. I mean, it might even be a situation of when everything's said and done. Because I'm just curious, like, whether or not Lomax was going to stick around, even if Susan comes back, would Lomax stay? Would she go back to her like family business? And I'm curious to see what ends up happening in that regard. I could definitely see it being a thing of, in the season finale, her leaving at the very, very end. Obviously, I'm getting to these episodes super, super late. The season finale's already been out for a couple days. I just haven't watched it yet because I'm watching this because I'm super far behind. But either way. So I'm curious to see what happens in that capacity. But then bringing up the storyline about her being immortal, that lady, like, they're trying to force her out of her home, and Lomax is like, all right, let me try something else. She's been there for a very, very, very long time. I don't think she's talked to anyone from the agency about that story. Like, she's kind of kept that to herself so far. So I'm curious to see, like, will she actually eventually die? She hasn't left the house since like forever ago, and like that house might be the only thing that's keeping her immortal. So if she ever left, she might go back to being a human. Like, either she'll like, time will instantly catch up with her and she'll die, or maybe she'll just like have whatever, like, say like she has 20 years left, she'll just live out the rest of those 20 years naturally. Maybe it's something like that. I don't know. I'm curious. Like, the fact that they sprinkle that in here in this episode makes me go like, all right, so we're definitely not done with that storyline, because we haven't checked back on it in a couple episodes. So, like, since Lomax's first day on the job, so I'm curious to see what ends up happening there. But on the other side of the episode is the Susan situation. Luke went to go visit the house to find out more, and he's trying to talk to it. And what does it do? It's pretending to be Susan. It even lights a fire. It's like, yeah, I was taught to build a fire in the Boy Scouts, but yeah, you're not fooling me. And it's trying to speak like Susan, but he's like, no, you're not fooling me. I know you're not Susan. And it's just kind of like, right, leave her alone. No, leave us alone. Susan doesn't need to be distracted. Like, we still don't know this house's history enough to know why it's doing what it did, why it took such an interest in Susan. It's something we've been like nibbling at a little bit over the course of the season of Susan has a special connection to this house. She spent time here with her dad, and maybe there's something there on that, like, maybe there's something overlapping in that. I never thought directly connected to her dad, but maybe something happened in her childhood here that she's just not aware of. But, like, why it's taking such a special interest in Susan, wanting them to be one, don't want her to be distracted. It almost feels like that kind of same thing seemed applicable with her dad. Like, maybe her dad was so caught up in work and didn't want to be distracted, and now it's trying to do the same thing for Susan, because maybe in its mind, if it is her dad on some level, is trying to like correlate those two things of like that's what she's going to be happiest when she's like working, so trying to keep the people that care about her away. I'm curious to see more about that. But yeah, it even tries to mimic Susan, and it's just not doing a good enough job. So the squad is gathering up, trying to figure out what to do. August brings in Rochelle and tells her about like, right, this house that is trying to absorb a living organism, and now trying to basically get a spiritual jaws of life to rip Susan away from the house. Phil was looking up some stuff about it and still can't find like, oh well, it's not till the end of the episode he's like, right, I found the like person who owned it previously, and tried to get in contact with them. I even love the whole thing. What was it? It's like trying to talk to some lawyers or trying to talk to get some records. And Phil was like, "Oh, do you want to mess with some?" I can't remember what he said. Whether it was like lawyers or something. And Zoe's like, "Yes, please." And it's like, "Oh, Zoe." She's still banged up a little bit, and she was kind of smiling a little bit and kind of in pain from smiling from the whole thing. But yeah, ripping into the lawyer dude, being like, "Oh, well, the records person." I think it was specific. He was like, "Oh, do you want to mess with some records people?" And for her, she's trying to get the information out of him, like, oh, we can get lawyers involved, but you know how nasty they can be. And then her and Rochelle meeting, and Rochelle's like, wow, you were just like I expected. It's like just like August described. And as they're walking away, she was like, his fifth daughter, which you see Zoe kind of perk up and stuff. I'm like, Zoe, it's so adorable seeing you like be all adorable and stuff. I thought that was so neat. But ultimately they do have a plan by the end of the episode. Granted, there's no guarantee how they'll be able to do it. We do catch up with Susan a little bit in the episode. Her in the mirror still trying to get out, but it's like, no, you don't need them. They're distracting you, Susan. And I love her like doing a pyro middle finger, like her middle finger, and then like lighting a fire on top of him. I'm like, yeah. I wonder does her her powers work, but probably it's not enough to bust her out of there. So, because she can see them and hear them calling out to her, but she can't do anything about it. So plan is let's go in there, try and do what we can. I love that the entire squad locked and loaded. It's like, all right, let's do this thing. And just as they're about to leave, Susan shows up. So you're like, I guess maybe the house fully assimilated, because there's no way that's the real Susan. She's like, oh, everyone's gathered, want to talk in the office. It's like, she wouldn't do that. That's wild. So it has to be a thing of it spit out a copy. I guess it's gonna keep them distracted. Like, hey, if you think Susan's fine, you won't come back to house anymore, and I'll keep Susan myself. So I'm assimilated with her enough to create a fake copy to walk it about. Because that was my biggest question for a good chunk of the season of, well, if people go looking, like, how are you going to handle that? Like, Zoe broke in because it tried to send messages, but I was like, well, apparently you can't mimic Susan's voice, but I guess it's assimilated enough now that it's able to like mimic and use Susan's voice when it tried to talk to Luke, but because it wasn't like that before when it did it with Zoe. But I guess it's also a different language situation because Luke was talking at it from a more I know you're something otherworldly, so maybe that connection made it decide it has to talk like Susan. But it was all it could do was like leave messages as Susan, like electronical stuff it could handle, but nothing physical. So I was like, how are you going to handle this? Like, would you project Susan's voice, which it did in this capacity, but it making a copy of Susan isn't too much of a surprise. We'll see next episode in the season finale where that goes and how that all breaks down and like how that really operates. So you could tell like it's not like everyone's like, wait, what's going on? And you see the look on Luke's face. It's not like he's fully buying. He's like, okay, something's up here. But I think he's going to let the house try and speak and try to spew its BS. He knows something's up. So I'm very, very excited to oh God, I want to slip in one more thing before I wrap this up. I was about to do the outro. There was this moment where Zayn was like, oh, how can you see me? How can you hear me? And Luke says this line of, well, how can Tame Impala sell 2 million, almost 2 million albums? It's just kind of like, what was he kind of saying? Like, the universe is a wild place or something. I was like, that's interesting because I'm watching this episode late. I was literally watching a YouTube video. Like, I was watching something like a few minutes beforehand that was that reference Tame Impala, which I was like, oh, it's not a band I'm that familiar with. I'm familiar. I've heard like one song a few years ago I really liked. I've just never taken a deep dive because I remember coming across something because I was like, who's Tame Impala? And something was saying like, oh yeah, Tame Impala, your most rappers' favorite band or something like that. That was, I don't know if that's like a meme around the band of just like, yo, most people are just that into them. They're a band like you might not hear about them, but somehow they're extremely. That's it's just so interesting to me. Like just funny enough that just the timing of it, I would also like watch something else that have a Tame Impala reference in it. I just thought it was interesting. So I just kind of wanted to squeeze that in there because I was like, I knew there was something else I wanted to talk about. So just wanted to throw that in there. Just kind of a little me thing, not fully pertain to the episode, but regardless, I'm sorry for running my mouth a little longer than normal, but in this regard, like I said, I'm excited to see where the next episode takes us. So till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.